Hello and welcome to another episode of Something Rotten. This is our Metal Gear Solid series. We have finally made it to Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty. My name is Jacob Geller. I am joined, as always, by my co-host Blake Hester. Hello, Blake.
My God, Jacob, quick question, QQ, a GQ for you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel as though God has smiled upon us this week and taken mercy after the brutality she put us through over the past 2 weeks?
I was like, oh my God, playing a video game is fun.
It's
fun to run around.
Oh my God. It's beautiful.
And as well as Blake, we are joined by a very special guest, both special because I think Blake and I are both fans of his work, and also because he's someone who, as far as I know, does not really play video games except for the Metal Gear Solid series. Patrick Willems of YouTube and Nebula is here.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Patrick, we're so glad to have you. I think this is the first time that we've had 3 Nebula boys on the pod before, which is very exciting.
Ooh. 3 coworkers. I see y'all around the office all the time. We eat lunch together every day. Now we're finally committing it to the pod.
Look, Patrick actually spends time in the Nebula office, Blake. You gotta go. You could probably hang out.
I am there so often. I shoot my videos there.
I ride a train under the Nebula office at least twice a week. That kind of counts. There's I think the in train goes under it, or maybe it's the R, and I'm like, oh.
Wait, are you in New York?
I am. I'm in Queens, Astoria, Queens.
Why aren't you hanging out at the office?
Well, all I do is Something Rotten, and I am technically like a contractor of Jacob, not of Nebula.
Okay.
So it's like I don't really know what I would do there.
You're in our Slack channel. You could go.
That's true. I was like, if I go during the daytime, like normal work hours, I'd just be doing my day job there, and I'd be like, that's a waste of Nebula's space.
Yeah.
To just be like, I'm gonna work on Game Informer here, so. It hasn't worked out just yet, but maybe soon. We'll see.
Well, if nothing else, Jacob, you should visit New York and come to the office, and then bring Blake.
Absolutely.
We maybe got some stuff cooking. We'll see what happens there.
Jacob, if you come to New York, I can show you where the beginning of Metal Gear Solid 2 is.
Oh my God! Now I gotta go.
I mean, not to jump right into the topic at hand, but when this is the first time that I've played this game since moving to New York City, which I did 12 years ago. But I was like, I forgot that it began right there, under the George Washington Bridge, and I was delighted.
It's really there is a lot of New York stuff about this game, some of which was cut from the game, which I'm excited to talk about. But Patrick, so this came up on when you were a guest on my charity stream earlier, where I was playing video games, and you were talking about how you didn't really play video games except for Metal Gear Solid, which I feel like kind of makes sense in that Kojima is a very filmmaker-y game designer and certainly seems like a guy who wishes he was making movies often. But when did you start? When did you get into Metal Gear?
Well, so I should say, I used to play video games pretty regularly. I would never say I was a hardcore gamer, but I played a decent amount of video games for basically up until 2011. As in, I would consistently, from the 90s on.
So is that you moved to New York then? If you moved to New York 12 years ago, you stopped playing games?
It's honestly more, I started my YouTube channel and became self-employed and just stopped playing. I never even made the deliberate choice, time to cut games out of my life. It was this weird thing where, I had I had a PS3. I played Metal Gear Solid 4 among other games. I was going back to the 90s. I would buy every Naughty Dog game that was a developer that I followed. And then right around 2011, when I launched my channel, which wouldn't become profitable for 6 more years, but then I also I started a freelance video business, which became my day job for those 6 years. And being self-employed and having to make my own schedule, somehow my brain just decided subconsciously that the video game consoles were this dangerous potential time suck where if I flipped it on, hours could go by, and I just got out of the habit. And then suddenly I was like, wait, it's been a year and I haven't played a video game. And in the past decade, I have only played in full 2 video games. And one of them that I just finished last week took me 3 years to beat, playing in 1 week installments. So in 2018, I bought the PS4 Spider-Man, and because my roommate at the time had a PlayStation 4, and I borrowed his PlayStation 4 because I was like, I have to play this game, and I did. And I would play in I would let myself do an hour a day, and I beat it, and it was lovely. And then like many people during lockdown in 2020, I bought a Nintendo Switch. And played a little bit of like Animal Crossing and stuff, and then got distracted by work and didn't touch it again. But I think maybe for Christmas in 2021, I got Metroid Dread, and then played it for like 4 hours that week around Christmas. And then last year around Christmas, played it for about 4 more hours. And then last week, played it for another 4 hours, and I beat it.
Wow.
That's kind of cool.
That's more than I could say. I never beat that game. It was too hard for me.
Yeah, that game is really hard. Like, thinking about
it was
spending like a year between, you'd have to like remember how to play.
Oh, that was always the thing. I jump back in and I'd be like, oh, what do the controls do? And but yeah. Look, Ravenbeak gave me a tough time, but I shut him down. And I feel really proud.
Congratulations.
What did you play Metal Gear Solid 2 on then for this? Did you play it on Switch?
I got it on the Switch. Yeah. But that said, I was good. It totally works. I mean, like the buttons on the Switch are basically arranged like a PlayStation controller.
Yeah.
So so it worked pretty nicely. But knowing that I was going to my parents' house for Christmas, I was fully prepared to like take my PlayStation 2 out of storage and pop the disc back in.
That would have been great. We've done that in other seasons before, and I'll be honest, it is a little cumbersome. The Switch streamlines the entire process, but
it really does.
You would have felt way cooler having done it.
Yeah, you would have got more cool points from us, but we appreciate you being here regardless.
I know. Thank you. But anyway, so that was a very, very long answer, but the very short version is, I used to play quite a lot of games, but Metal Gear Solid was my favorite series.
And did you play them in order, like upon release? Did you play 1 before 2?
Not quite. If we want to get into my full history with this franchise,
and we do.
I don't know how long your episodes are, and so I don't want to just monologue for 2 hours. Okay, so Metal Gear Solid 2 was the first one that I played in full. I played my introduction to Metal Gear Solid was in the late 90s. I got, I believe at Pizza Hut, a demo disc with demos of multiple games. And it had on just the very beginning of the first Metal Gear Solid. And as, I don't know, like a 10-year-old, I found it so hard. Just the idea of, when you climb out of the water at the beginning, you just have to get to the elevator. Yeah, that was so hard to me because stealth had never come up in any games I'd played. And it was like the game seemed so adult. I'm just like, just the maturity of the gameplay was something that I was not like experienced with or prepared for. And it seemed exciting, but I'm just like, that's a game for older people. And I'm going to go back to Crash Bandicoot now. And I remember being over at like a friend's house and his like older teenage brother was playing Metal Gear Solid. And he was like, look at this. There's a character called Psycho Mantis. And I was like, this seems so cool, but it also like stresses me out. And so I never really played it, but it was just a thing that I was always curious about. And then, I'm like in middle school. I'm playing more like M-rated games and stuff like that. And I'm reading a lot of IGN and their reviews, and everyone was very hyped about Metal Gear Solid 2. And I was like, this one I'm gonna play. And it looked so interesting. And I got it for Christmas, I think 2001. And and that was the time when like a lot of my Christmas presents would be video games. But I remember vividly Christmas Day. That was the first of the games I got that year. That was the first one that I popped into the PS2 because I was like, I have to play this right away. And then, the title sequence begins with the Harry Gregson Williams score, and I'm just like, oh my God, it's like a movie. And I loved it. I fell in love immediately. And because I had not played the first one, the shift from Snake to Raiden did not piss me off the way it did with a lot of people, because I'm just like, well, I have no attachment to Snake. I'm vaguely aware that he was the guy. And then I went back and played the first one after 2. And then I remember playing, I got Twin Snakes for GameCube. And I loved Twin Snakes because it's like, oh, the cutscenes are like redone and more over the top and more anime. And that was, when I was like 14, that was really cool. And then I played 3, loved it. Played 4, loved it.
Weird, but
weird. I mean, they're all weird, but 4, it's just like the sheer length of those cutscenes, the amount of times the word nanomachines is uttered, and also turns out to be the explanation for everything that happens, is nuts. But it's the thing where 4 is the last one I played. I've never played Phantom Pain. And there's another one after that?
Well, there are some ones in the middle. They're like mobile ones, like Peace Walker. There's my favorite,
Revengeance
Rising, which is the one that stars Raiden.
One,
yeah. All of these I've been curious about, but they're all in my kind of like post video game era. And it's the thing where like I genuinely want to play Death Stranding. That is one of the few games in the past decade where I'm just like, do I just like buy a console for this and somehow, I don't know, do I if I can find a way to just turn it into a video that I can justify the time.
I mean, I was thinking while you were describing that the Metal Gear Solid 1 Twin Snakes thing feels like a Patrick Willems video because it is so like bizarre in the like idea of like, we're going to remake this, we're doing it like more, we're doing it different, but also it's the same, and it's like it has to be the same script, but Snake is going to do a kickflip off a missile.
He does.
Hold on. Also worth pointing out, to bring it full circle, because I know most of your videos do revolve around movies and directors. That is a Japanese film director who did those. It's Ryuhei Kitamura, who directed Versus and is in a lot of like Sion Sono stuff.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah. I think I butchered his name, but that we are going to talk about that on the bonus episode. We're going to talk more about it.
It's funny. Him. I have not thought about Twin Snakes in like 15 years until in the middle of like just talking there, it like just returned in such vivid detail. So yeah, you got to talk about it.
It is. I would love to play Twin Snakes as part of doing this thing or whatever, because it's just so weird. Also, just to make your child self who got that demo disc feel better, I am an adult man who is ostensibly a professional gamer, and getting to the elevator in the first screen of Metal Gear Solid 1 was like bafflingly difficult.
Okay, thank you. I feel so much better now.
So Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, is a game that came out 3 years after Metal Gear Solid 1, which feels impossible when you play it, because, oh my God, technology moved so fast, and this game is doing so much. My first notes are all on the intro movie, which is, 1, wow, there is a lot of money here, and 2, this is the greatest score in any video game. Like, the Harry Gregson Williams score, we talked with previous guests about kind of like how interesting the music was in MGS1, and maybe it lost a little of that by going more cinematic, but like, I cannot deny that like I get chills every time I hear that opening score.
The part near the end when it slows down and you got just like that final march as it like just like builds up to the big finale, it's
Yeah.
It's incredible. And I'll put it this way. I used that last stretch of the theme as the concluding track in like one of the big movies I made in high school. I was just like, I'm just like, it's the best music ever. That's what I'm gonna end my silly 11th grade movie with. And also a thing that when that title sequence came up, a thing that I did that meant nothing to me at the time, but looking at the credits, the opening title sequence was designed by Kyle Cooper, who's like probably the most legendary movie title designer of the past like 30 years. Like, he did the titles for like Seven and like,
oh, so yeah, like the guy,
wow. Yeah. But yeah, I was looking through his whole list of credits, and it's only big movies like Seven, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, stuff like that, and then Metal Gear Solid, I believe 2, 3, and 4,
and 5,
and
5, and Death Stranding.
The Death Stranding intro was so good.
Sorry, and Resident Evil 2 remake. Interestingly enough. As far as I can tell, the only non-Kojima game he ever did. That's wild.
I just think it is so interesting that, like, I feel like with games specifically, as time, as it gets further away from them, it's kind of harder to tell, like, what is technically impressive and not, because, like, what the PS5 can do now is so different than what the PS2 can do. And so it's harder to tell, like, this is effort, this is money. And yet there are so many sequences in this where I'm like, this is money. Like, there is no cheap way to do this. They are, like, spending stuff on it. Which is interesting we're going to be referencing this a lot, but there is a Jeff Keighley piece called The Final Hours of Metal Gear Solid 2 that's like a really interesting look into the development of this game. And we have pretty specific statistics on like how many people worked on this game and how much it cost, which is 70, like everyone, including like composers and stuff, 70 people. And then the game's budget was $10 million, which is $17 million today, which is nothing. Like Sony recently said that they didn't even consider $100 million like a AAA game anymore. So like it is, also in that story, you hear that everyone on this game was crunching for literally a year. So it's not like it's a good story of how to make a piece of art, but like it is really, really impressive what they accomplished here.
The thing what I took away from, I don't necessarily think I agree with like older games. It's hard to tell what was like cutting edge or something, because I feel like when I see this in MGS1 or Grim Fandango, I was like, oh, this is clearly leagues better than their contemporaries. But like the thing I took away from this opening, which I took away also from MGS1, is the care paid to the cutscene direction in these games, which I think is obviously better than games of its time. I also think better than games today in a lot of cases. And I don't want to act like Kojima stands alone, because I think like, we played Killer 7 recently, which has incredible cutscene direction and looks so cool. And there's like a lot of care to how like its digital cameras are placed and how you like see things. But like there's such a eye for like filmic language in this game that's like afforded to it by a better console, the PS2 over the PS1, and more technical specs, whatever the fuck. But like this opening and every cutscene after, like there's some really impressive shit going on that is like, for as good as a lot of like Sony's first party stuff looks, which is like basically lifelike, the least interesting thing in the world in those games are the cameras that they're filming things with. It's like, I don't know, put the guy in the third, and then we'll have him talk, and then maybe the camera will cut back and forth. And Kojima and like, Suda as well, I kind of lumped them together in my brain weirdly. Like they think about the camera as a physical object in the game, and this cutscene is incredible. Like there's so much care here that like you just don't find in games today still. I mean, God of War, I guess, is a little different, but I still think that camera's pretty boring.
No, there is such an eye for, like, and this is something that you can kind of continue to see throughout the Metal Gear series, but, like, there's such an eye for, like, troop movements. That scene early on when there are, like, the the people like killing all the Marines on the tanker, and it's just like the way they are shot, kind of tactically moving, is so kind of like visceral and feels very efficient. It feels like what they would be doing, but it also feels, like, I don't know, it feels like there is a camera filming actors there in a way that I just find really impressive.
Exactly. And it's something that feels, even though this game is over 20 years old and I'm playing it in full for the first time in 2023, it feels so refreshing to be like, oh, there's actual direction here. Like, there's cutscene direction. And it's like, it's something I don't think I've thought about since like Devil May Cry 5, which had like really great cutscene direction. And it's baffling to be like, this game is, more than half my age. And like, I'm playing it, be like, wow, this feels new and refreshing and cutting edge. And it's like, well, it's fucking not. It's very old compared to like most video games I play. But it's so cool.
Yeah,
it rocks.
so here's the question. For the cutscenes, were they using motion capture yet, or was this still just okay?
Yeah, motion capture was, fairly early, but had been around for a couple years by this point, used in video games specifically, like and the Silent Hill team as well. Like, I think a lot of Konami projects were using mocap, because like Silent Hill 2 was mocapped, which came out around this time.
Facial motion capture took a while longer to catch on. Most of the face stuff is, I would guess all of it is animated by hand, but like bodies are being done by real actors.
Okay,
for the most part.
That makes a lot of sense.
Something that I want to talk about, as this game begins in New York, he's walking along the Brooklyn Bridge.
Washington,
right?
George Washington.
Washington Bridge. Look, I don't live in New York. He jumps off. When you look into the development of Metal Gear Solid 2, one of the things that you will find is this game was slated to be published 1 week after 9/11, and there was a lot of stuff that was related to 9/11 that happened in the last like couple weeks with this game, in a way that you hear about, like, gosh, Patrick, you probably know this better than me, but it's like Zoolander released the week after 9/11 and like digitally erased the Twin Towers from the skyline, and there's like other stories like that. But
the original Spider-Man,
yeah,
Sam Raimi.
I think the biggest one, or the movie that changed the most actually, was Men in Black 2.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
with Johnny Knoxville.
He is sure in that movie with two heads, two Johnny Knoxvilles. But yeah, if you ever look at Men in Black 2 and go, obviously the movie is not good, but if you ever wonder, like, why is it so short? It is because in the way that, like, the climax of the first Men in Black, kind of was all about like the World's Fair in Queens. They wanted to, in this one, their big New York landmark that the climax would be based around was the Twin Towers. And that all and that movie came out, summer 2002. So, that all just got stripped away and leaves the movie feeling, like it's missing something.
Yeah, so in retrospect, especially when considering already that they like did not think this game was going to come out in 2001 because it was so ambitious and they were kind of crunching so hard. The start of the game, we've learned a lot of this is from their like translated articles. The Did You Know Gaming YouTube channel has a couple really good videos on this, but like the start of the game was supposed to be like investigating claims of WMDs in Iraq. Like, that was going to be the opening of it, which is wild because, like, that didn't even, it's like taking that out feels like seeing what the next 3 years in America were going to be, not like the week after 9/11. So that was taken out. There were, I think, shots of the Twin Towers that were taken out of the kind of games thing. The finale, which we won't be talking about in this, but like just in general, was going to include a giant thing crashing into Manhattan Island, and like the knocking over the Statue of Liberty and like doing all this shit, and like all of that was modified or taken out. And it's really weird to read about. Apparently Kojima, there is such good documentation of how this game was made in a way that, like, God, I wish more games had this. But there are like pages of writing about Kojima just being like maybe we shouldn't release this. Like, maybe we just should not put this out at all, because it is a game that is in many ways critical of, like, America, kind of talking about political cover-ups and misinformation, and there's a lot of stuff about politics, and it is just this, like, there's this weird feeling of despair when you read it, where he's like, you know, maybe we should just skip this one. Maybe we should just, like, not put it out and make the next Metal Gear Solid. And then they convince him to put it out. It seems like no one actually cared. He was like, people cared so much more about the Raiden switch than, like, anything related to the country's politics. But the craziest fact is that one of the wild Kojima ideas he was tossing around early on was that they should maybe name this game Metal Gear Solid 3, because one, that would just be funny. People would be like, what happened to 2? And also, the 3 would refer to the 3 tallest buildings in New York, which is like, good God, I'm glad they did not go with that.
What a jump.
Wait, what is, if it was the Twin Towers, what's the other third one?
Empire
At that
State
time, it
Building?
would have been Empire State. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like, I think that was probably like a first year pitch, but it is just such a, you know, I like that sometimes he just says ideas that are bad and then everyone moves on.
And, you know, he'd still be doing that 23 years
What a
later.
wacky
Sure
guy.
does.
Jacob, this ad is not like other ads.
Oh, it's not?
Yeah, usually we're hawking people's wares, but I use Nebula. This is a true thing. I use Nebula a lot. I got the app on my phone. It's really great. Do you use it?
I was using it just before this to watch Patrick Willems' new video on Days of Thunder.
Oh my god, dude. So Leo uploads videos of him just hanging out with his girlfriend for hours on end, and like, because I don't live in Minneapolis anymore, I'll just turn those on like I'm hanging out with Leo and Marie like I used to. And the fact that he's, believe it or not, it's not just a Leo app. There's like all these other great creators on there, is just the cherry on top of the Leo sundae for me.
Do you think Nebula should rebrand as leovader.com/Nebula?
I think they'd be the biggest streaming service in the world if they did. But here's the thing. The point of all of this is to say, listeners, you gotta sign up for Nebula, because not only will you get early access to Something Rotten with no ads, you'll never have to hear this ad again, heaven forbid. You also get all our bonus podcasts where we're telling you books, news stories, movies. Then you get all Jacob stuff where he's making food for some reason from video
That's right.
games. You get all Leo stuff, Patrick stuff, Life Where I'm From, great YouTuber, Philosophy Tube. I think everyone who has a YouTube channel at this point, Nebula has done an amazing job signing up the best content creators as far as I'm concerned.
Also, if you're like, oh my gosh, I gotta hear what they have to say about the second half of Metal Gear Solid, that's available right now, because Nebula gets episodes a week early every week.
We also did a spoiler cast about Alan Wake 2 with Mike Mahardy, which was awesome, and that'll never be
really
on,
good.
That'll never be on the main feed. Yeah, it was a great episode. How do people sign up, Jacob? Tell them. Take it home.
They go to nebula.tv/somethingrotten. They sign up. When they do, that money goes right into our pockets so we can keep making this show. And we appreciate it.
And I spend it on dumb things. I'll be honest with you, listener. I'm not spending that on smart things.
A big thing when this game was coming out, we'll start talking about the game soon, but I do just think so much of the pre-release stuff is really interesting. There were huge trailers for this game. This kind of started the like Kojima making 10-minute trailers things, because he had 2 of them at 2 back-to-back E3s. They are really good trailers. There's this line I like in one that says, Metal Gear Solid changed the world's games, and now the world changes Metal Gear Solid, which is like, that's cool. That's a good line. They also, one more thing is, before he made it, he said that he was inspired by the twist of Terminator 2, where, surprise, Arnold is actually a good guy, where he wanted to be like, surprise, you're playing as a different protagonist. The cool thing about Metal Gear Solid 2 is it actually pulled it off, where Terminator 2, like, put in all the trailers that, like, Arnold's the good guy this time. And so it's like, people actually got to be surprised. Anyway, let's talk about this game. Blake, coming off Metal Gear Solid 1, were you as thrilled as I was that, oh my god, Snake controls like a real human person now?
For sure. I mean, I had an idea he would, because, look, this opening, I put it on like a well-worn glove because I had Zone of the Enders growing up, so I had the Metal Gear Solid 2 demo. I don't even think I ever played Zone of the Enders, but I probably played 800 hours of this level. And I was like, I got it. I know exactly what to do. I flew through this level. It was no problem. But yes, I was surprised to find that it did still, for the most part, feel pretty good in 2023. The one place, weirdly, just like a hyper-specific example where it feels bad is taking cover on a wall and trying to shimmy to the edge of it. But yeah, like just navigation is so improved in here that it's like, Jesus Christ, thank you, Kojima, for making a good game.
The ability to aim in first person feels overpowered. It feels like you're breaking the game because in Metal Gear 1 it's like you couldn't even see anything beyond your screen, let alone aim at it. And this being able to like use that little laser sight to line up a shot from like across, like that huge boiler room or whatever. It's significantly easier just to start with. Like, I think the tanker section in general is like it's not particularly challenging stealth at any time.
Dude,
but
I was pulling off John Wick shit in this level. It was wild how fucking hard I was going. Like, the game does actually, there's like a room right before you find Metal Gear that it does a lot with like tier geometry. What would you call that? Vertical. There are multiple levels to this room, and like you can really play with how you take out enemies that are way below you and way above you, and it feels so much cooler than anything in Metal Gear Solid 1 to just like be able to think about the geometry in interesting ways.
So here's a question. Like just looking at, let's say, the tanker section, how do you guys approach playing a Metal Gear game? Specifically, like, in terms of what do you do with the enemies? Do you trank them? Do you kill them? What do you do if you're seen? Because I realized when I was playing this again, I'm like, oh yeah, I have like when I played this the first time, back in, when I was like in middle school, and then I played it a couple more times, like in high school and stuff. I would generally, I loved the trank gun so much. I'd be like, what if I don't even kill anybody? What if I only trank people? And this time, I remembered, I'm like, oh right, you can grab people and like break their neck. And I was like, you know what? These are all terrible people. They murdered everyone on the tanker. I will kill them sometimes. But my general rule with Metal Gear almost always is, if I am seen, I just let them kill me and then go back. I'm just like, no, I fucked up. I failed. I'm going to go back and do this right and not, and I cannot get an alert. I will not accept that. But I realize that's just me being, that's like there, you don't have to do it this way. And so I'm curious how you guys approach the game.
I play it non-lethal. The only people that died so far are people who stood in the way of their buddies' guns, which I was like, that's kind of funny. There's friendly fire with the enemies. I play non-lethal. I'm hugging every corner. I'm waiting. I'm biding my time. I'll sit on a corner for 25 minutes if I don't think I can get this shot. I don't care. I'm there. I'm waiting. If he's walking left and right, I'm finding the exact right micrometer to put a trank in his head. If he's got a buddy, I'm coming up with I'm doing complex physics problems to figure out the best way to get my shot across this room so that someone does not see his buddy fall. And I'm killing no one. I am the angel of mercy through these games, except for when those dudes stood in the way of their own friends' guns. That's not my fault.
Hey, not your fault.
Yeah, you can't fix stupid, you know what I'm saying? But yeah, that's how I'm playing it. I'm not, even the boss, I was like tranking only. Actually, I think you don't have any lethal options.
Yeah, I don't think you have a gun at that point.
But
Olga?
I will be.
You got to trank her.
Mm-hmm.
Right, okay. I will be, if I can, I will be tranking the rest of the bosses as well.
Yeah, I generally feel, it almost feels, when a game gives me a silenced tranquilizer gun, I'm almost like, this ruins the rest of the game because I'm never going to use anything but this. Like, that's how I've played basically every stealth game. And I also think it's an interesting conversation about game design of like, stealth games have worked really hard to make getting seen interesting because I think all of our impulses are like we just got to restart this thing. Like, Patrick, you are not alone in feeling that like you want to have a perfect run, and if you don't have a perfect run, just quit and start over. And so I was trying to not do that in this game, and it's not that hard to avoid alerts, and they like lose interest pretty quickly. But I do think, it's like this game lets you be much more kind of perfect feeling than I felt like I could ever be in Metal Gear Solid 1. The fact that you can hide bodies, I loved, even though it's like,
oh yeah,
there were
how do you do that?
You have to be unarmed and press square over a body, and then you can drag them. But like, even though almost none of the guard paths even intersected, so there was like very little chance of actually someone seeing someone else's body, I was just like, I'm gonna do this clean. And so yeah, I'd drag him to a locker. The locker would have like a picture of a lady on a bikini in the inside, and so I'd put him in that one and be like, enjoy yourself, bud.
Did you? So you can do all kinds of funny codec things. When you find the first sexy lady in the locker, did you go into first person mode and then call Otacon?
No, I thought there might be something, but I couldn't figure out the exact sequence.
I did it. Otacon is like, Snake, what are you doing? There's no time for this. And Snake in the right-hand corner is like panting. And it's so fucking funny, dude. It cracked me up. Can we talk a bit about the setup to the tanker and while we're there? Because I found it pretty fascinating. So after the event,
how Snake has like a stealth camo that immediately malfunctions when he lands on the tanker.
It's got to malfunction in the coolest way possible.
Well, it's funny. The stealth camo is like the most OP shit from MGS1, but you never get it until the very end. And so it's funny that the first cutscene in this game, it's like, rain, piece of shit, got it. But after the events of MGS1, Snake has become, I don't know, like kind of a mercenary, a freedom fighter. What would you call him?
He's part of, he is part of a group called Philanthropy, which is an anti-Metal Gear group recognized by the UN, but not like an American. It's still kind of like a PMC or something. Like he's kind of outside countries.
Yeah, what we find out is after the events of the first game, I guess like the how to build a Metal Gear has leaked, and Otacon has this great quote where he's like, every state in .com has their own Metal Gear right now, which I loved because it's like, of course.
Yahoo.com, Metal Gear.
It's like, of course this would happen. I mean, you got to do some mental gymnastics to be like, how would they actually build this thing? But I love the idea that it's like this end-all be-all weapon of the first game is just like, anyone can build one now. We did it, and it leaked on the internet. And I'm like, all right, there we go.
Yeah, and just that it paints the entire first game as like basically a failure. It's like, sure, okay, you prevented a nuclear launch. I guess that's good, but like the big thing was like, oh my gosh, what if this Metal Gear gets released to the world? And it's like, it did. Yeah. There's nothing you can do about it. Everyone has one.
I mean, it's like the opening cutscene for how cool it is. That idea is so bleak for the world, right? Like it is an incredibly bleak game when you think about like, this is the worst possible scenario within like the Metal Gear universe, is that anyone outside of like the 4 people who knew Metal Gear existed a couple years ago would know it's real and have one.
Yeah, and just the idea that it's like, when you get on the tanker, you're about to go do stuff, and then like, oh no, terrorists invade, and so there are these evil guys. But before you do that, your mission is like, the Marines have a Metal Gear, and they are lying to everyone about it. And so you are just going in there to like take pictures of it and be like, hey everyone, look, the US military has this like massive nuclear enabled machine, and so it's like, it's not like, even though your goal is not like kill all the Marines on the thing, it is just starting from like US military, bad, lying to everyone. That's like where the game starts out, and then kind of like spirals from there.
But that's all fiction. That's not like real. That's never really happened. This is all just work of fiction, all just fantasy.
No, definitely not in the years after 9/11. Nothing.
We certainly don't have to worry about like
construction going on.
I think my building's falling. We don't have to worry about like weapons of mass destruction like actually leaking out and people being able to build them themselves, right? Like that's all fantasy, right? kind of like dragons and kings and castles and wizards.
Yeah. Okay, so I haven't played the first game in a while. Can you guys remind me, beyond just... So, like, is Metal Gear just, like, kind of a big robot piloted by a person that can, like, launch nukes?
Yes, it doesn't have to be piloted by a person. It can be autonomous. And then the other thing about it, at least in the first game, is it shoots the nuke out of a railgun, meaning that it cannot be detected on radar because it's like it doesn't have its own propulsion. It's just a big bullet. So it still is kind of like, why is this so much worse than just a country being able to shoot a nuke at another country?
Right.
But like ultimately, yeah, that is why. It's like an undetectable nuclear launch.
Okay.
However, the great irony of the Metal Gear is that they were ostensibly designed to be nuclear weapon disposal robots. So
yeah,
right.
Otacon made it,
Interesting
but then
foil to
didn't
them.
know that it was going to be able to shoot a nuke because he is the dumbest man alive.
Oh,
hilarious
Otacon.
moment in that game.
I do really love it. There's a quote. This is between the tanker and the Raiden section, but there's a quote that says like computers and atomic weapons grew up together, which I think is like such a cool, good just like analysis. And there is a lot of this, like, if you read even a little bit, you will find that like so much of what defines our modern world was initially like used as military technology, including like weather systems, radar, the ability for you to go on like weather.com and see if it's going to rain or not was like crucial to military functioning, and all of that was funded as like part of military stuff. And now it's leaked into, everything. And it's, the idea of like computers coming up at the same time and like kind of inextricably linked to these weapons that are able to kill millions of people is like such a good kind of like interesting way of looking at this whole game, which is obsessed with technology and military operations.
Technology also that just people will get their hands on, right? Like, I think that was the most fascinating part for me, was the like fucking .com quote was like, oh yeah, like we tell people we have this awful thing that no one should have and we should be terrified of. Every Bob and Steve down the road is gonna be like, well, how do I build one?
Okay, so there's this whole tanker section. You're running around on a big boat or like an oil platform. It's very fun, as we talked about. There's one boss fight against a woman named Olga, which is it is fun in that it has a bunch of little interactables like this whole level does, where you can shoot a cloth and then it flies away, or you can like shoot the spotlight and then she can't see you as well or whatever. But I think it's mostly, this is just a kind of a section being like, here's how stealth works, here's what you do, and then it is like the last big section of this level that is both technically really impressive and the most story stuff happens. So you get into the bottom of the tanker. There is a like, Marine commander or whatever is giving a speech on what Metal Gear means for the military. And it is this, oh God, I love how it's like kind of video gamey, but it's also kind of over explained, where Otacon's like, I hacked into his script, like the teleprompter is going to take about 7 minutes, so you've got 7 minutes to do this. And so you have to get up there in 7 minutes while he's giving a speech in real time and take pictures. But like the cool thing, and again, it's like, oh my God, this was not possible on the PS1, is there are like 60 dudes in each room who are just standing looking at the commander. And like, if you get seen, which I did, there's this amazing sound effect where it's one guy gets alerted and then you hear all 60 of them have like the exclamation point pop up over their head.
Something this game does brilliantly that I think the first game tried but kind of failed is humor. This game is very funny, and there's a quick throwaway line where Otacon's like, oh yeah, you got about 7 minutes, unless he sneaks in a good joke or two. And I was like, that's a fucking good bit.
And then it is good when you get to the end of that, and then he's like, actually, I'm going to keep going. And then they just add on like another 90 seconds on the clock.
I didn't know that. That rocks. Holy shit.
So, yeah, Blake, I think what you're saying is you were too good at the game and did it in the time limit, and I forgot where to go and ran out of time, and then the game gave me more time.
Oh yeah, like I said, I'm John Wick shit. I'm going through this game no problem. Yeah. Pro gamer.
Also, can I say I feel like we kind of like just breezed past Olga, who I feel like is
talk about Olga.
So again, I have not played this game in like more than 15 years, I would say. And so much of this like returned like so vividly to me. And I'm just like, the introduction of Olga where it's I mean, Kojima really loves those moments where, you know, things like maybe go into slow motion or things kind of pause, just kind of like luxuriate, and maybe it's like, you know, the rain hitting like Snake's poncho as he walks across the George Washington Bridge, stuff like that. But like that initial like introductory shot of Olga where like her name and credit appears, where she reaches up and takes off her hat, and you see like she has armpit hair, and I'm like, it feels like a very Kojima detail to be like, she's gonna have like a tank top on and suspenders and a crop top, and she's gonna take off her hat, and that's gonna be like her cool intro, and like as soon as she returned, or not returned, but showed up, and you see like her name is Olga Gerlukovich. And I realized like, oh right, when I was like in high school, I made a movie with a Russian villain named Gerlukovich. I was literally just like ripping off everything from these games left and right. Like that's how I've forgotten how much space in my brain this occupied back in the day. But like. Yeah, I love every single character in this game. And I think the thing about it that I missed so much, because I haven't played Metal Gear in so long, is just the fact that like Kojima is this Japanese man who is obsessed with like Western politics and the US military, but then also, you know, goes about telling a story about the US military in the most anime way imaginable. And just, I had like, whether it is just like the direction of things, all the like wonderful nonsense this game gets into like later on in it, just I had forgotten how much I loved just because like again, when I played this game for the first time, I had no real attachment to Snake, so I was not mad at Raiden at all. And I just remember spending hours listening, because it was I don't know, it was this time when I played video games, I'm just like, I feel like I need to get, like, anything could be important. I need to get everything out of this. And I would just listen to every single Kodak conversation between Raiden and his girlfriend. And the stuff that people hated, I was just eating all of it up. And I love it. I have no great insight other than I love everything about this game, and everything that's silly that turns some people off is what I like the best.
No, there is this amazing connection between like kind of, you know, an obsessive level of research or just kind of like dorkiness about some of this stuff mixed with this heightened reality where it's like, okay, you know, Olga, when you first meet Olga, Snake is like, hey, throw your gun off the side. But then it turns out that she has a knife that is a gun that shoots like a bullet at him. And it does the like slow-mo Matrix, like bullet trails behind it thing. But then they also take time for Snake to be like, huh, that's a real weapon that existed, you know, and it's like, if you look it up, there is like a knife gun, like that was a thing that happened. And it totally feels like, you know, like me, Kojima was like, you know, someone who would just like look at a bunch of pictures of wacky weapons and be like, wow, what if that was used? And then in this game, it's like, yep, we're gonna include like, the knife gun in it.
That kind of stuff is, I think, what's so fun, because like there are like real ideas about like, you know, the world and society and politics and 21st century militarization, all that he really wants to explore. And then there's also just stuff like when Snake returns and is like, my name is Iroquois Pliskin. And he puts his references, like like he's so unsubtle about all of them, and just like I mean, obviously you get to the point, like I haven't even played Death Stranding, but I know that like, you know, Guillermo del Toro is just a character in the game and stuff like that. Like,
that's right.
Everything he loves is just right there on the surface, and he's like so proud of it. He doesn't even try to hide it at all. It's delightful.
On the theme of things being funny, in the speech the commander is giving, there are sections where he just yells like, "Intruder to the left! Intruder to the right," and then he's like, "Just keeping you on your toes." But it is like, it's so good to have like all the people in that room suddenly turn towards you and you like dive behind a box.
The way that scared the shit out of me the first time it happened, and then the way I laughed my ass off as I realized what he was doing. Fucking God, this game rocks.
It's great. Well, wait, is this the first Metal Gear game that introduces the guard who has to poop?
Nope, that is in 1.
Okay. I think because I played 2 first, this was my introduction to it. So, okay. Oh, I love that guy.
There is Kojima loves having guys have to poop. There's another section where someone pees on Raiden that apparently there's a whole cut thing where Snake wanted a guard to back up to a rail with his pants down, and you think, oh no, I'm gonna get pooped on, but then he just pees, and apparently it was just like every developer was just like, I'm just not gonna work on that, like I'm not gonna do it. But the most of the story of this section happens at the very end here, where you've taken the pictures of Metal Gear, you're like, okay, I'm doing good. And then suddenly, the terrorists bust in to the Marine, place where they're giving the big speech in front of Metal Gear, and who should be there but our old friend Revolver Ocelot, who is back and cool as ever.
But he's called something else. What is his name? Solaraska?
Oh, well, Shalashashka? Because he was referred to that in the first game as well. Like, that was...
okay.
That was like a Revolver Ocelot, I guess, is a code name or whatever. But there is this notable exception where I was like, boy, I'm so glad that I played the first game before this, because I would have no idea what the fuck is happening. Where Liquid, who ostensibly died from Fox Die at the end of the first game, is Revolver Ocelot's arm, but also seems to be like competing for control over his body, and so sometimes will take over and start talking in Liquid's voice instead of Revolver's voice, and it's all quite a lot. It goes into like a complete sci-fi movie very quickly.
Yeah, and so like, and the technical name for him is Liquid Ocelot, then?
Oh, okay. Maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, it is. Also, isn't it in this section where someone first brings up the Lalilulelo?
Yes, they do, and they do not explain that at all. They just say it, and everyone proceeds like that's a normal thing to say.
And it's a very funny thing to hear like intense military people say, because it is just gibberish, but it's delivered very seriously.
Yes, that whole section is great, and then Revolver / Liquid jumps into the Metal Gear, which I wouldn't keep the keys in if that was my giant death machine robot, but they let it go. I mean, there is like politicking stuff that happens where there's like a kind of Russian guy that Revolver like partnered with to...
Well, that's Gurlukovich, and Olga is his daughter.
Olga is his daughter, right. But then Revolver kind of betrays him at the end and is like, I didn't care about you, I just wanted to get in this Metal Gear. I'm sure there is more nuance to the scene that I'm kind of not getting because I don't know what happens in the rest of the game, and so I don't know what's foreshadowing or not.
Yeah. I was wondering, because I know Kojima is like, what if we explain every character? But I'm like, do I really need to care about these dudes and their whole deal? Can I kind of tune some of this out? I'm sure they'll come back to bite me in the ass when there's like 3 hours of cutscenes about Gurlukovich later, but
but we'll find out then. This is another scene where it's like, boy, there is money on the screen, because Liquid starts piloting Metal Gear Ray. Metal Gear Ray, also a different kind of Metal Gear than the first game because it's amphibious, so it can go underwater.
Is that the one at the beginning of Rising?
Yes, because it's got the big arms.
Now,
and
now this cutscene rocks. Unfortunately, my decades on the internet, I had a CinemaSins moment watching this. I hate to say it, hate to out myself like this, but the Metal Gear Ray is constantly opening its big mouth and growling, howling, whatever you would call it. And I was like, what would be the actual function of that mechanically, that it would need to roar like Godzilla? And then I got too hung up on this and missed a lot of this cutscene as I was trying to like come up with an excuse as to why it would need to roar as just a robot.
Intimidation, Blake. Make everyone scared.
Yeah.
I don't know. It seemed CinemaSins, I'm on it. I don't think it made sense.
I mean, honestly, considering how much time Kojima likes to spend on cutscenes where characters just talk about technical stuff, I'm surprised there wasn't a scene with like, the guy who worked on the Metal Gear program who was in charge of the sound design for it, and who will explain the origin of its dinosaur roar, and then the philosophy behind like why this is like a great battle tactic.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. I feel like, based upon hearing how Kojima writes about these things, I have a pretty good idea of how the Metal Gear functions, except for the gigantic roar, which I get it has a mouth to let the beam go through, but then the thing's just like a Tyrannosaurus Rex for a few minutes. I'm like, what is the need for this? Is it a cooling system, to let air in and out, cool the machine? I don't know. But I was so hung up on this last night.
I mean, but I also think, it's like, obviously, a Metal Gear is a ridiculous like war machine, like why is it better than just a missile? And so I think if you're thinking about it in the history of mechs, and specifically what it's near, which is like Evangelion, it's like the Evas roar because they are kind of like, organic and are like expressing this like pain at the world or whatever. And so, if you want to do a little like personalization of the Metal Gear, it is this kind of like it is like screaming because it represents war. It's just like it is just kind of going off, and it's this is a game that doesn't take, because it explains everything else, I think it stands out more. But it's like the Metal Gears don't make sense because they are like metaphors, more than anything. And so I'm kind of willing to like give it this.
So
also,
you're saying
cooler
it's
if it
dumb
roars.
of me to get hung up. So you all are saying I am in the wrong.
Yeah.
For getting so hung up on this is what I'm hearing.
Would you prefer if it didn't roar?
Well, no, the roar is fucking cool.
That's
there we go.
all that matters.
I love these scenes of all the dudes haplessly shooting at it and getting wiped out. Like anything that has a bunch of dudes uselessly shooting at something that they have no hope of killing, whether it's this or, Godzilla, I'm there for. And then there's just so much money here. There's a scene that you can actually see in the intro where Tanker was supposed to start flooding and Snake was going to like run through it, that apparently they just like couldn't get to run on the PS2 with the specs available, but it does flood. Eventually it gets to this just like unbelievable, I mean, you could picture it like a 2-panel comic spread of like Metal Gear straddling the like broken pieces of the tanker, just kind of like in the New York skyline, and yelling, and Snake is like bobbing there in the water and then like sinks down. And it is there is just so much fucking swag in like how they pull off the end of what is essentially the cold open to this game.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it's like it kind of was one of those moments where I was like, the PS2 can do this. Because, like, think about, Jacob, we played Silent Hill 3 a few months ago. The greatest looking game of all time. There's not too much going on in those cutscenes. They just look really fucking good. And Metal Gear Solid 2, like Silent Hill 3, is all real time. There's no pre-rendered that I'm aware of cutscenes.
Yeah, other than, like, the intro sequence.
Right. And I was like, I genuinely did not know the PS2 was powerful enough to handle this. That's probably a product of crunching endlessly for a year and forcing the PS2 to do it. But
Hey, yeah, play Shadow of the Colossus, Blake. There's some crazy shit going on there.
I'm just saying, I was blown away by this moment. It's like, I didn't think this was possible to do.
Yeah, it's a thing. Something I was thinking about while playing the game was just the general look of it, because I remember like when I first played it, and that era of video games and like the PS2, it was a thing where I was so used to pre-rendered cutscenes, especially, if you looked at like Final Fantasy games of the era, where like I would crave those moments where it's like, oh, it's going to get shiny now. And it's going to look really good. And like I was like, oh, that's what video games do. Like they look one way, and then you get to the story part, and then they look better. And so I remember like when I first, when I was like, I don't know, 13 or 14 or whatever, and played Metal Gear Solid 2, initially I was a little surprised that like, oh, it doesn't get shinier when you get to the cutscenes, but it looks so good throughout. But then it's also like, but now I was thinking about it, and just the like, it looks great, and there's a sort of like low contrast aesthetic to all of it. Like there's not a lot of hard lighting. Like I feel like the way it's lit is like they made a lot of really deliberate choices to be able to push the technology as far as it would go. And so it like, I'm trying to think of like even how to describe like the look and aesthetic of it, because it's like the whole game is almost all like shades of gray and green, and I know nothing about actual like processing graphical power of the PlayStation 2 or whatever, but yeah, it does look great while also like looking very distinct, I think, for like games of that era.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of, if you want to get nitty gritty, there are a lot of really clever decisions about like how hallways are lit, and they're doing things where they're kind of faking reflections, where it's like it looks like light is like bouncing off the floor and doing something, when in reality those are just kind of like it's almost they're like painted in, like they're not actually bouncing. But yeah, it's like especially in the tanker, which is this extremely controlled environment, it's like every room is this big, and so we can put every light exactly where we want it to be, and there is just like a ton of thought paid to kind of how those sort of materials like actually look, and their reflectiveness and their shininess and all that.
Patrick, I want to ask you something, and I don't know exactly the smartest way to phrase this question, but like you are someone whose professional career revolves around talking about and analyzing and watching movies. This is the most cinematic moment of this game we've played thus far, by sheer example of so much shit is happening at once on screen. Like, what are your thoughts about Kojima as like not a game director, like a cinematic director, someone who's like clearly so influenced by films and tries to mimic them? Like, how do you think he pulls it off? Like, where do you think he stands compared to like his heroes?
I was honestly thinking about this exact topic more at the very beginning, in the stretch when Snake is walking along the bridge and then jumps down to the tanker, because there I feel like the direction, especially with like the rain and all the cars and the headlights and just like the sound design of the traffic and all of that, it's that feels like he's getting into late period Tony Scott territory of just like a little more impressionistic with like the editing and the visuals, because there's not a lot of story happening there. It's just setting this mood of, this guy in a poncho walking along a crowded bridge at night. And I feel like right there especially, that's like, as much as obviously at the end of the tanker section is kind of like really like throwing down the gauntlet for like, look what, Jerry Bruckheimer, don't you wish you could produce a movie that has like a set piece like this? But just the very beginning of the game, I feel like that's really him, deliberately showing off as a director, and like look what I'm doing in terms of like lighting and shot design and just cinematography in general and editing and all this stuff. And like I think he's a pretty good director. Like it's honestly, when it comes to Kojima as a filmmaker, the part that I wonder more about is just like, his dialogue scenes, which especially in like 4, are so long and like so technical, where I really want, like, the thing that I remember thinking about a lot in like 2008, I think, when I played 4, is I'm like, clearly this guy wants to make movies, but also movies, because of like the time constraints, could never allow him to indulge himself the way games do. And so he's kind of found his perfect medium. But yeah, I think just in terms of like, a command of like visual storytelling, he's like genuinely good and has studied his influences so much that I think he can walk the walk.
Yeah, I having played a lot of Kojima games in just the last 5 years, I feel like I think a lot about kind of the what you said, and Jacob, you said, people say a lot like Kojima just wants to be making movies, and I think that's the case for a lot of other game directors, as like they would rather be making this thing into a movie. I don't ever get that sense from Kojima. Like, I think he's very influenced by films and wants to mimic films, but like his games are so mechanically interesting that I get the sense he is making what he wants to make. And like, granted, now he is attached to an A24, Death Stranding movie, but like,
yeah, I think partially people say that because he has said it, where he's like, well, I wanted to make movies, but it was too hard to get into them, so I started making games. But I agree with you, like, in the actual game,
I feel like over the last 20 years, like, I don't know, I feel like he would have made a movie if he really did want to by this point, and granted now he is, but like, I don't know, I always get the sense that he's like happy doing this as games instead. But granted, I've never met the guy, I've never asked him.
I really, yeah, are you gonna have him on the show?
No, we're not. Lord.
Hideo Kojima.
No.
Yeah,
We'll try. We'll get his weird robot from his podcast.
Oh my god, it'd be the first podcast he was on with good sound editing. Could you all hear that Spotify thing? Jesus Christ.
no,
It's awful. It is horrible.
So I'm guessing that, like, do we all have the same dream of just visiting his studio and like taking the photo with him that like everyone, every cool person gets to seem to do?
Yeah, Timothy Chalamet goes up, poses next to that astronaut.
Yeah, I want that so bad. Well, the thing with Kojima as filmmaker is I totally agree that I think what he's doing what he really wants to do and making the stuff that he really wants to make. But I'm a little, and we'll see what happens with this A24 Death Stranding thing. But it's the kind of thing where I'm just like, I would have expected him by now to have just been like, well, I want to just try making one movie. Just like, just as in like make a live action thing. That's the main thing where I'm like, if you're at the point now where you're just getting Norman Reedus and Del Toro and like, Lea Seydoux and all these like people to just come in, do performance capture and look exactly like their live action selves. I'm just like, wouldn't you like to just be on a set once and just and just at least see what it's like to direct a thing like with live actors, not in like a mocap studio. Like, I feel like he should just, well, I guess he is. Like, okay, I haven't followed the news super closely other than the basic announcement. What is happening with this Death Stranding A24 thing?
I don't know that it's particularly been revealed other than it's happening. I don't even know, like, if he's directing.
Yeah, but it's not, he hasn't been like, I am directing it.
Right.
He seems excited and closely involved, but yeah, it's not. And the other thing that, like, we don't know about him is, like, obviously he's always taking pictures with these people, like, these filmmakers who he loves. Maybe he does go like to their sets. I don't know if he's ever hung out on like the set of a Del Toro movie or something. It seems possible because he does just kind of like to hang out with those guys, it seems. But yeah, I don't know, and it is also something that I think the series gets. I think he is kind of a Stephen King-esque character in that as he has gotten more like well-known and powerful, he gets edited less, and that is how you get Metal Gear Solid 4
Yes.
like
that's how you get Death Stranding too, like
yeah, and like some of the cinematic decisions in Metal Gear Solid 5 are like completely unhinged in a way that is both like interesting and almost impossible to watch. And so it's like we talked about actually with our previous guests Reed and Ed how like part of Metal Gear Solid 1 I think has cutscenes that are directed maybe even more impressively because there is so little detail to work with that it's all in like framing and camera movements, because it's like they literally don't have eyes, they don't have mouths, so it's not like you can focus on expressions. And so there's a lot of really clever like framing and just like how they block characters in a scene. And I think as kind of the potential of what video games can do goes up, that it kind of gets the better of him in some cases. And so maybe 2 is this really like, it is the point where it's like these things are perfectly met in the middle and he's able to kind of do enough but not anything that makes it very compelling.
I will say, Jacob, you brought up the Stephen King comparison. Stephen King directed one movie. He dipped his toe in to be like, I want to see what this is like, and then promptly never did it again. And so I'm just like, I want Kojima's maximum overdrive.
But without the 14 pounds of cocaine.
No. Okay, we need to get Kojima addicted to cocaine. Then give him, like, I don't know, $50 million to make a movie, see what happens, then send him to rehab and get him back doing games.
That's how Something Rotten started. That's a deep cut for the real fans.
So we cut to something that I did not expect. I knew the Raiden Switch was coming. That's a famous part of the game. It's 2 years after the sinking of Tanker, and it is in basically the same place. It's like it's off the shore of Manhattan, which like is weird because when you're there, you're not like seeing the New York skyline. It kind of looks like you're just in the middle of the ocean, which I guess if you were, 30 kilometers is 18 miles. Like,
it's further
That's
up.
pretty far out.
Yeah.
But like still, it's not, it is not in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And you are playing a character who is called Snake. And even more than that, you are playing the beginning of Metal Gear Solid 1. And this is what I really didn't know. It is room for room the beginning of Metal Gear Solid 1.
It's when we hit Raiden where I was like, shit's getting weird. Because it did not immediately clock for me that it was repeating MGS1 until I got out of the water. And the Colonel, I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. I was like, that's very similar. Like, that's the point where it started clicking with me. And then Colonel starts repeating the same lines from MGS1. And it's not, Jacob, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not one for one the exact same speech he gives you in the beginning. But it's like select lines throughout what he's saying is from MGS1. And I was like, what is fucking happening in here? And to go a step further, I don't know if I've been trying to like figure this out, if it's like foreknowledge of what actually is going on with Raiden, because I know-ish the twist of the game, or just the script of the game influencing me. But there is a point where Raiden says this whole thing feels like a dream, and it like made this section make more sense in my head and be like, yeah, ever since the character switch, this whole game has felt weird in a super intangible way. Does that make sense? Because it doesn't really make sense to me, but something about it before that moment, I was like, what isn't clicking in my head? Not in a bad way, just in a like, this feels fucking weird to me.
No, it's incredibly weird. In all of my like reading about the game, I have never found anything that suggests that this part was meant to be the opening. It always seems that there was a planned Tanker section where you play as Snake and then you switch to Raiden. But everything about the section treats it as if you have never played the game before. Including the codec calls being like, here's how you do basic actions.
Right.
Here's how you like switch to your gun.
It gives you another tutorial. There's like a very quick tutorial in the Tanker section. And then when you get here, it tutorializes the whole... Yes, I'm just repeating what you're saying. But yeah, my brain was melting. Part of me was a little annoyed. I was like, I got it. Let me play the fucking game. The other part was like, what are you doing to me right now?
It's such a strange, but clearly deliberate thing. And then they also spend so much time, especially once Raiden meets a really cool guy named Iroquois Pliskin, who sounds really familiar.
What a cool guy.
But they spend so much time talking about how this is his first real IRL mission, but he's like, well, I've spent years training in doing VR missions, which are just exactly the same. And you see shots of his VR training where he's just fighting I don't diamonds or whatever, and
it's shots from the Metal Gear Solid 1 VR missions expansion,
right? And it also to me this felt I do not want to say what Kojima's intent was, but it feels kind of like making fun of people who play a lot of video games and are just like, oh look, I could totally be a soldier because I know all the stuff about guns and tactical strategy because I play video games, and so I'm basically a badass in real life too.
No, Patrick, I think you're 100% on the money there. This is something we talked about with MGS1, which has kind of a thread throughout it that says play less video games, which is kind of funny to get to the end of that game after 10 hours and it'd be like, go outside, stop playing my video games. This one, I think even more so, at least more explicitly, Jacob, let me know if you feel the same way too, is tackling, I don't want to say the video game to military pipeline, because I feel like that was not a super big thing for at least 5 to 10 more years when Call of Duty became so big.
Well, and that is, I will say, that is referenced explicitly in Metal Gear Solid 4, where they talk about training soldiers, and you see the UI of the PS3 screen playing Metal Gear Solid 4.
I think they're it's hinting at that idea in here that violent video games are not breeding, because I don't want to go down a conservative pipeline, but violent video games are... What? I don't know. How do I say this?
No, I think you're right, and this is what Something Rotten struggles with is there is so much bad faith talk about how video games cause violence that it feels almost impossible to have an actual discussion about how video game valorization of the military has real life implications. And I think that's essentially what's happening here. And again, it is this very kind of it feels very prescient in that Raiden is playing a video game, and because he's good at the video game, he's put in war, and we know now that drone pilots use Xbox controllers to control drones and and war is increasingly video gameified because people are separate from it and they're using technology to do all this shit. And so it is this kind of Snake is the old guard, and because of that, he understands what combat is like because he's been in it before. And Raiden is this dude trained on all his experiences who's never done it.
But also, to that end, visually, Raiden is a great stand-in for the gamer. I mean, granted, he's so anime, but Snake has 5 o'clock shadow. You know what I'm saying? He looks like Kurt Russell. Raiden looks like a teenage kid. A cool one, an anime one, but he is a kid. You know what I'm saying? There was no attempt to make him look grizzled or even badass. They do that later in the series for sure. But in this one, it's easy to be oh yeah, a 15-year-old might see Raiden and be like, oh, he kind of has the same hair as me or whatever. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's very pointed.
Yeah, he's so pretty.
And I
yeah.
That's, I'm sure our listeners will write in if we don't mention it here, but was it designed intentionally to be quite androgynous looking? To be yeah, this is not the grizzled man of war. This is just kind of a pretty boy.
A kid. Yeah, which by God, a lot of kids go to war when they shouldn't because they want to do hoorah shit. And that's, video games are guilty of that as much as anything else.
But unfortunately, when they send kids to war in real life, they don't let them keep their, beautiful kind of floppy hair that floats around balletically, when they cartwheel through the air.
God, that cartwheel's so cool.
They also don't get to be samurais either, unfortunately.
But when we enter this section, they're calling him Snake, which is, again, this very weird, and he has like a mask on for like the first long time, and you can hear that it is not David Hayter, but like they're calling him Snake. He's doing the same shit that Snake did in Metal Gear Solid 1.
He, for 5 minutes, is doing the Snake voice before he immediately drops it, which is very funny.
Yeah, and then you hear that, like, Solid Snake is the leader of a terrorist group, but he's like, but not that Solid Snake. And it's like, what the fuck is going on? It's great stuff.
This is so much fun. And also, it's great to see the Colonel back because, you know, I mean, if anything, like... here's a question. Go back to the tanker section for a minute. How did you guys feel about when you die hearing Otacon shout, Snake, 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 as opposed to the Colonel's classic, Snake?
Colonel was better.
Of course.
For sure.
Obviously.
Colonel was better.
But yeah, it is weird, and it's like when you save as Snake, Otacon kind of tries to do like a Mei Ling thing, where he gives you a quote, and then he's like, sorry, I'm not very good at this.
Hilarious bit the first 2 times, then I started speeding through those.
It's like, you get to this part, it feels like the game is starting for the first time, because it is Campbell back, it's the situations we're familiar with from Metal Gear Solid 1, they're teaching you how to play, and then you meet a guy who looks like Snake, whose name is Iroquois Pliskin. That Pliskin is obviously, like, Snake is named after Snake Plissken from Escape from New York. What is the Iroquois reference, other than being, like, an indigenous tribe? Is that to a movie, or are we going to figure out what it means later?
Genuinely, again, I have not played this game in a while. I cannot remember. I don't know, is it because, you know, the Iroquois tribe was based in New York State and they're off the coast of New York? I really don't. I mean, it's a really cool name, but also I cannot think of any other fictional characters that have ever had the first name Iroquois.
And it's like, when he says it, it sounds like he's making it up.
Yeah.
You know, it sounds like he's going to say, I'm Snake, and then he says, I'm Iroquois Pliskin.
Importantly, we got to talk about who else is in the introduction to Iroquois.
Who's that?
Pliskin.
Vamp?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, okay, so another copy of Metal Gear Solid 1. You walk up, there is this bloody hallway. It's shot in exactly the same way as it is before the Gray Fox scene in Metal Gear Solid 1, and then you get in there, and there's this other crazy guy killing everyone, but it's not Gray Fox, it's Vamp.
A vampire. A vampire.
A vampire.
Vamp is so cool.
From Romania. Vamp rocks. You want to know a fun fact about Vamp that I bet y'all didn't know?
That he's voiced by Phil Lamar?
Well, you're going down the right road. In Japan, Vamp was the original voice actor Kojima wanted, died. So the original replacement was going to be something rotten frequent talking point, Shinya Tsukamoto, the director of Tetsuo the Iron Man, Bullet Ballet, Snake of June.
What?
All of that.
Wow.
However, yeah, Shinya and Kojima are big time friends. They post pictures in that lobby all the time. But I think scheduling issues, it didn't work out, so a different actor played it. But Tsukamoto did play Vamp in the Japanese version of MGS4. So there you go. There you go.
God, how strange.
We love Tsukamoto on this podcast, and we finally found a game with him almost in it.
I don't know what we're supposed to make of Vamp other than he's a cool, weird guy who's a vampire.
That's what you're supposed to make of him, Jacob. What is the question here? He rocks.
And he jumps a lot. He does a lot of like big theater. Like he'll be up in like the rafters of a room, and then we'll like, you know, do a big dramatic like leap down, and has knives, and you know, I when he slits the guy's throat and the blood just sprays up in the air and like rains down on him. It's great. I also something I was thinking about. You know, again, it's been a little while since I've played the Metal Gear games, but it does seem like there are certain bosses that Kojima just likes so much that he brings them back in future. Like, Ocelot from the first one, and he's back again in this. Vamp returns in 4, where he's just like, they're so good. Like, I can't waste them on just one game. They got to be recurrent characters now.
No, totally. I mean, it's like the whole. It's like 4 has like essentially a Psycho Mantis fight and a Sniper Wolf fight, and whatever, and they're just kind of made slightly different. Here's a small note. For reasons that I don't fully understand, the shortened name of Iroquois Pliskin is J.G. Pliskin, which I immediately wrote down Jacob Geller Pliskin.
Junior General. Junior General.
Oh, that's right.
They say it.
Okay. Well, Jacob Geller, Junior General, same diff. There is this, like, another great bit of kind of, like, world explainy stuff where you have this long call about how you can't pick up enemy weapons because they're all, like, ID locked, and so Raiden can't use another dude's. And then in the next cutscene, Raiden picks up a random gun that someone throws to him and shoots a bunch. And I was like, why can he do that? But then we find out that it's, in fact, Iroquois Pliskin's gun. And so it's like, it's explained. It's like, oh no, he wouldn't have ID tagged it because, like, he's different than the people Raiden is fighting. And so it is this kind of, like, over-explaining, playing with your expectations, and then, like, being like, no, they did think about that too, in a way that I find very fun and is not annoying yet.
Question, is this... I mean, I don't know if there's a way that we can know this, but... can anyone think of an earlier fictional instance of the, like, ID tagged weapons thing? Because, like, I'd forgotten that they had it in this game, because I remember that's a thing they introduce in the movie Skyfall when Q gives Bond a gun and he's like, this is coded to, like, your palm, like, basically only you can fire this. And I'd forgotten that, like, a decade earlier they had it in this game.
Yeah. Jacob is Oh, well, you're asking earlier, but is that what happens in Control?
Well, in Control, it's kind of, it's something slightly different because it's like the weapon chooses her. And so, like, she, that's more of like a sword in the stone thing.
Oh, well, Patrick, what about Thor's hammer?
I mean, that's really just whoever's worth it.
That's kind of like an ID.
This is, specifically like ID tagged guns, which is also, I have heard, and this is, I read this years ago, so this is potentially not the case, but, like, I have heard that that's actually something that, like, gun manufacturers have fought, because it was at least proposed to me as, like, a safety measure where it's like, oh, only one person can do this, so your kid can't, like, get your gun and shoot it. But I guess it is some level of, like, the government's controlling my guns, and so people didn't want it or whatever. It's a big part of 4. They talk about the ID tagged weapons a ton, but I'm sure there are earlier examples, but I can't think of any.
Yeah. Oh, also, on a totally unrelated note, there's a character that we have not discussed yet who I think is very important who comes in here. Because, Otacon is no longer there to save our games. Instead, Raiden's girlfriend is just along for the mission, like, on the radio, and then you learn that his name is Jack and her name is Rose.
That's right.
And it's the thing, this is introduced and you do wonder why are, like, it's this guy's first field mission. And why do they have his girlfriend just there on the radio? Like, it seems very unprofessional. I mean, obviously we'll find out more about that later on. But
wait, wasn't it explained right when she's introduced? Isn't it because Snake fell in love? They realized love is important to have on the battlefield to create a sense of desperation. I'm pretty sure the Colonel said this.
Yeah, but it's like, that feels like an insane explanation. It's like he
Jacob,
said...
we're playing a game with a vampire in it. What do you mean it feels like an insane explanation?
I mean, it is. And it's like, there's no way to explain it that isn't insane, because it just seems like a really stupid thing to do that's going to, like, really distract him like, during this mission. But it is... I feel like that like the Rose stuff is a big introduction of, like, and I just remember this, like, from, playing it and talking to people about the game, back, like, around, like, in the early 2000s, and just having Rose there just leads to, if you want to listen to them, just Kodak conversations that have basically nothing to do with like the main story, that are just about them, talking about like, going, like making dinner plans for after the mission is done and when he's back home, and talking about their relationship. And basically she becomes kind of like a therapist as the game goes on, where it's like Raiden will just like dump all his feelings out into the codec. And this is like I remember listening to so many of these, just being like, well, it's in the game, it might be important, I probably should. But it's a thing that, I get why people didn't like it, because they wanted cool, grizzled Solid Snake. They did not want, a whiny little boy talking about his feelings to his girlfriend. And I just love that they put so much of this in the game.
No, they do a great job of, like, Raiden is really infantilized through a lot of things. It is like, I already know how to play the game, and the colonel is calling me every 5 seconds to tell me how to play the game. And like, it's my first big boy mission, but my girlfriend is here because like it's too scary to do it alone. And like, there is a lot of stuff that it's like Snake got to fall in love in a cool way. Like Raiden is just like, they're bringing his girlfriend because they think he can't do it without her, which is like not cool. It's like, Mom, I don't need your help. Really feels like a lot of his vibe, which I think it rocks. And the idea of people getting mad at this is so, it's like, obviously gamers have not gotten more mature since 2001, so I'm sure they still would. But like, actually pulling off this switch and having it not leak and doing all this, it like truly is kind of a remarkable thing. And no matter where I land on the game, ultimately, I just have so much respect for like thinking of that and doing it.
Oh yeah. And I mean, everything about, especially like, playing it again now, like years later, everything about Raiden just seems like Kojima is trying to piss off like a big portion of his audience. And I'm whether in movies or whatever, I'm very often in favor of the creator trying to like antagonize the audience. And so I love this. I think it's all great.
I would have to...
Another Evangelion reference.
I would have to assume in one of our... somewhere, Game Informer still has, it probably would have been a physical mailer that they sent this game out, the embargo agreements. And I would kill to know what
that would be so
the
good.
Raiden thing was. Because like Last of Us Part 2 we saw, you couldn't talk about more than half of the game because they switched characters. I'd love to know what Konami said about the Raiden switch in those.
Yeah, I mean, we could probably like read reviews at the time and just see what they mention. It's like, I bet the Game Informer's review might not be accessible, but like I'm sure IGN's is or whatever.
Also, just if anyone listening was writing reviews for publications at the time,
Write in.
Yeah,
Raiden does.
Let us know. What was that embargo? Okay, so you meet Pliskin, you have this whole interaction. Apparently there's kind of a hard to find item that's a razor that if you find it before you meet Pliskin, you give it to him, and then the next time you see him, he's clean shaven. But then if you wait a week, like in your console time clock, the beard will grow back, which is like, come on, man.
Some developer did not see their family for 2 weeks because of that shit.
And then we meet someone who I don't know anything about, but her design is fucking awesome, which is Fortune, who is like a mercenary, I guess, is just this lady with a railgun who like incinerates a bunch of dudes, and they all shoot at her and they all like bend around, and it's just like, okay, there's another superhero in this game. We've got another like Psycho Mantis character who just like has unexplained powers.
Well, they explain here that there's like this terrorist group Dead Cell, right? That was like,
oh, that's right. Yeah.
And their members are like Vamp, Fortune, Fat Man, who is of course the explosives expert, who wears rollerblades, and And yeah, and maybe more, but like I. Who is the artist who does like the illustrations of like the cover art for the games?
Yoji Shinkawa.
Yoji Shinkawa.
Okay, I love that style, and I love his artwork so much. And when they in like the codec call, or like maybe it's Iroquois who's explaining about Dead Cell, and you get the illustrations of like the whole team and I just remember like just the delight of like, for instance, even though when I played this originally I had not played the first one in full, I still knew who all the bosses were and about all their cool names from the first one, and then just the reveal of like, oh, we've got a whole new team of like, these cool, these awesome sounding, awesome looking. It's basically just like a superhero team that they've got here, and everyone has their own thing, and it's great. Obviously, 3 has another great team.
I mean, it's a rogues gallery, right? Like that's really what he's got, which is so cool. I can't wait to find out more about her life as she lays dying, presumably in that Metal Gear Solid style.
Fortune's really.
I love
these people.
We didn't really talk about what Big Shell is, which is like the second. We're off of Tanker, we're on to Big Shell.
Yeah, it's very strange. So when the Tanker went down, the Big Shell was built in the same place it went down. And correct me if I'm wrong, it is not too dissimilar from Shadow Moses. Is meant to help clean up the spill of Big Tanker, like it is,
or at least that's the public story.
Right. But like, I don't know what you would call that, a river cleaner facility. But
yeah,
like,
I mean, it is like, it's enormous. It looks like a giant. It looks like 7 connected oil rigs, or like, what they build. It looks like Outer Heaven in Metal Gear Solid 5, essentially.
And, yeah, the our mother base, right? Either way.
Yeah.
And the idea of it is a little weird, which I guess just hints at, obviously, this is not what Big Shell is actually for, is if this thing goes down, which is why Raiden is here, this thing has been hijacked by terrorists, the president is under threat of kidnapping. If this thing goes down, the cleanup will take decades, which doesn't fully make sense if it's literally just there to clean up the water. But that's the like big threat, is because Fat Man, as we're about to learn, has placed C4 along the buttresses or whatever the hell, and is threatening to blow it up, which will create a catastrophic, environmental scenario for New York and ostensibly the world.
Can we discuss New York geography for a minute? So the Tanker section begins at George Washington Bridge. A bridge that goes across the Hudson River, okay, connecting Washington Heights to New Jersey. How far does the tanker get when it sinks? Wait, okay. So just to check, you guys have not played the end of the game yet, have you? Okay. I won't say anything about the end of the game. I will not spoil anything. But Big Shell is presumably built where the tanker sank. Right? But it looks like Big Shell, when you see like the wide shot of it, there's like nothing around. And so I'm like, that has to be out in the ocean. But and so like, the tanker was going down the Hudson and then out into the Atlantic, out through like, New York Harbor. It didn't seem like the tanker section went on long enough to get out that far, to sink out like way past the city.
Ocean currents, baby. It sinks and they just swoosh it along. Talk to James Cameron about where he found the Titanic. Look, I think, made by a Japanese team doing their best to get New York geography, but perhaps not as knowledgeable about it as two lifelong New Yorkers, as I'm on the call with right now.
Astoria, baby, only place in the world. That would have happened if it was on my side of Manhattan. If that was happening over there by Roosevelt Island, I would have taken care of it. Unlike Snake, who messed the whole thing up.
Exactly.
I'm like, not in my damn city.
One of the things that I really like about Big Shell is the lighting is it's different than Tanker, but it's another thing that I think of as like very PS2 lighting, which is this beautiful kind of like hazy, sunny thing where it honestly it looks like Eco, the Fumito Ueda game, which is one of my favorite games, but it's like it is so kind of like ethereal feeling. And part of the reason that it doesn't feel like it's off the coast of Manhattan is because it feels like you're like nowhere, just kind of in a cloud.
Which I feel like was one of those decisions probably made just if they're like, oh, it's a cloudy day, so the cloud like diffuses the sunlight. It's just a reason that they don't have to do like, harder lighting and like glare and stuff like that. They can just have this nice soft lighting
and draw a skyline.
Right.
I also there's that shot when you go up the elevator and it's indoors and then it goes to outdoors and it's just kind of this open strut and you've got like the sun shining through and Raiden's looking all cool and it's just like, God damn, this is, like in terms of doing the first game but showing what the PS2 is capable of, it really feels like they're just showing off.
It's also one of those things where I feel like they're because the first game is all set like at night in a snowy environment. They're deliberately trying to like with this game just do extremely different like climate and like time of day settings. You get like the intense rain and wind like of the tanker section, and then just bright sunlight for the rest. And like so, a lot of the boss fights are actually just like outside in bright daylight. The opposite of the first game. But I think what's so fun about Big Shell just as a setting is, so much of the game you're running around or like dangling from railings with nothing around you. It's just like, it's isolating like the first game was, but in a different way. Like, you're hundreds of feet above the ocean. You can't, like, when you like look off into the distance, there's nothing there at all. It's just, they managed to, just, I just appreciate that it's a completely different like look and feel and everything about the setting is just unique to this game.
Yeah, I mean, and it relates to what Blake said earlier. As Raiden says, like, it feels like a dream.
Right.
It does not. It feels like a VR mission, which we will maybe learn more about. Do either of you have any more like burning things that you need to say about this section of the game?
Not a lot else happens here. When Jacob, when you told me that we're going to talk about, up through meeting Peter Stillman, is that it?
Mm-hmm.
I was shocked at how soon that arrived. I just kind of assumed, I remember, there's some bomb disposal guy, but I assumed, I don't know, we'll probably, that's probably, after, fighting Fat Man and stuff like that. And it's so soon into this section that, you don't fight Vamp. You just see Fortune the one time. We're so far away from, the big story twists and revelations and all of that. Yeah, I mean, okay, here's what I'll say. We mentioned it before, but Raiden's little aerial cartwheel is a great move and way better than Snake's just tumble. I love that. I do think it's really fun as a gameplay mechanic to sneak past guards outside by just dangling from the catwalk and just shimmying by. That's fun. Other than that, I can't think of what else there is to bring up.
I like that you can slip on bird poop.
Yes, yes, that
throw
rules.
That one out there. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Is it okay? So I started playing this maybe a day or so after my second viewing of The Boy and the Heron, and now I'm just wondering, is there just a thing in Japanese art media where they just love putting bird shit into things? It's because there's such an. Have you guys seen The Boy and the Heron?
Oh yeah, a lot of bird shit in that movie.
So just the detail like the attention to detail with the bird shit and animating the bird shit, like that, there was a lot of thought put into that, and clearly same thing here, and yeah,
I mean, I think we've covered Kojima loves body functions.
He does.
He loves pissing and shitting.
Yeah.
So for Miyazaki, who knows? There are two things that I want to tell you from the Jeff Keighley making of thing. One, Kojima, a big karaoke guy. Do you know one of his favorite bands? American band, or yeah,
Devo.
Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Weird.
Loves to do some Earth, Wind, and Fire karaoke.
Is there a video of Kojima like singing September?
That would be.
Oh my god!
Very
I would pay anything for that.
Also, to convince Harry Gregson Williams to do this score was apparently, it was like he had only done movie scores up to that point. Apparently, they sent him like a mixtape or like a CD that they burned themselves. And he was like, it's one of the weirdest packages, Harry Gregson Williams speaking, it's one of the weirdest packages I've ever got, because like it had scores that I had done, but it also had like scores where I had collaborated with other people on the movies, and somehow he knew exactly what songs I worked on that had like never been released, and there were songs from movies that had never had a soundtrack released, and they were somehow on the CD. And so it's like Kojima sent him this like incredible haunted CD of his music, and he was like, I guess I have to do a song.
That's impressive, because so Harry Gregson Williams is one of the many composers who kind of like came up working at Remote Control, Hans Zimmer's studio. Because I believe they tried to get Zimmer for this originally, and he was just too expensive. But a thing with, you know, like Gregson Williams saying that you know, they had tracks that, you know, that like he was like not credited on but had done. That's like, because it's a thing where there's score, like I'm so fascinated by the Zimmer studio, because, you know, so many people have worked there, and it's the thing where it's like, you know, so many scores have like 5 big name composers like actually working on them, but then like I mean, for instance, it's the thing where like Pirates of the Caribbean 1, the credited composer is Klaus Bedelt, but like Zimmer is the producer of the album, and so many people worked on that because they made that score in 2 weeks, and so I'm just like. But there are so many of like the actual credits or who did what is like under lock and key. So the fact that Kojima was able to actually get the info about like what tracks from probably Zimmer scores Gregson Williams did is really impressive.
A detail from that Jeff Keighley piece that stands out in my brain is just like, God, he was the GOAT back in the day. You know, criticize him all you want now, especially after the most recent Game Awards. Jesus fucking Christ. Is he makes sure to point out that Kojima, on the hand he writes with, has built up a big callus from highlighting bugs that need to be fixed in the game. And I'm like, man, we will never get game journalism like that anymore.
He said, yeah, it's like he goes through 2 highlighters a day.
I just like... Look, here's the thing. I like to think I've done some good work out there. That isn't just like guides and fucking streaming news posts or whatever. Keighley crushed us all 20 years ago. That's my favorite part of that whole thing. It's cool it has the budget and the head count and all the like nitty gritty of the game. I want to know about the calluses on Kojima's fingers. I think that's such a good detail.
Patrick, do you know that Jeff Keighley, this game guy who was a journalist and does the Game Awards, you know his parents like invented IMAX? He's like a nepo baby to IMAX.
I mean, I don't know anything about Jeff Keighley. I feel like this is the first I'm hearing of him, unless I like read stuff that he wrote like 20 years ago and didn't look at the name. But wow, that's wild.
It's very weird. I need to go soon, so we should wrap this up, even though we could talk about this game for another 2 hours.
Listeners, go seek out Jeff Keighley's Final Hour series. There's one on the original Half-Life that's out of control.
The Metal Gear Solid 2 one is hard to read on GameSpot's current site, but you can access it through the Internet Archive. There are ways of kind of getting around this. Great stuff. Wish we had more about it. Patrick, thank you so much for playing your yearly video game for this show. It means a lot.
Yeah, thank you.
It was well. Look, no, I started this after I did my yearly gaming and finished Metroid Dread.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh yeah.
So
okay.
if anything,
You played 2 video games this year.
I know. I really, really exciting stuff. No, this is one of my favorite games of all time. It made such a big impact on me when I was younger, and I still think about it so often that it was a joy to return to. So thank you for giving me this opportunity, and thanks for having me on the show. This was just a lot of fun.
Look, we all love Nebula here. You recently released the Patrick Willems holiday special, which I watched with my partner and was a treat. I hope all our listeners who are already on Nebula go check that out. And if you're not, hey man, you got 2 good reasons to sign up now.
Yeah,
3
look,
technically.
I'm so glad you enjoyed the holiday special. It is. I have no way to prove this, but in my opinion, it's the dumbest thing that Nebula has ever funded, and that's like a point of pride for me.
Yeah, it ends with beating up a Funko Pop, which is, the best thing that you could hope for a piece of media.
Exactly. So yeah, everyone go watch it.
And for next week, we will be playing through the second third of this game. I think we're going to end when Raiden fights a Harrier, but we'll confirm that. It'll be in the description of the next episode. And until next week, my name is Jacob Geller. You've been listening to Something Rotten with me and Blake Hester. And I just want to remind everyone that his name isn't Snake. It's Iroquois Pliskin.
Bye.